It's been described as the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. Thousands of patients developed hepatitis C and HIV after being given infected blood during the 1970s and 80s.
Now, victims in Scotland are hoping to find out what went wrong and why, as an inquiry into the contamination publishes its findings. Those affected in other parts of the UK will have to wait for answers.
Gill Fyffe was contaminated with hepatitis C after undergoing a blood transfusion during childbirth in 1988. She joins us from our Edinburgh studio now. Gill, thank you very much for your time this morning. I mean, this is going to be such an important day for you, I know. Would you remind us of just what happened to you and where the problems first began?
Yes, good morning. When my daughter was born in 1988, I was told I had to have a blood transfusion after the birth, and I resisted because there was a lot of publicity at the time about HIV. I didn't know about hepatitis, and so eventually I was convinced that I did need the transfusion, and I received 7 units of blood, and I received 4 units of blood, and 7 years later I received a letter from the Blood Transfusion Service telling me that the donation had been contaminated with hepatitis C.
And how had the condition affected you?
Well, in those 7 years I had been extremely tired, and in fact for the first 10 years after infection with hepatitis C, the only symptom is what they call unreasonable fatigue. And I had put it down to not being able to cope with 2 children and a teaching career. But the tiredness was extreme. When I got home in the evening, I fell asleep and my family woke me up to go to bed. And on one occasion, I fell asleep at the wheel and wrote off our car.
But at that stage, you didn't realise what was happening. Is that correct? You didn't realise what the condition was?
No, because fatigue is a very difficult thing to describe. As soon as you say to someone, "I am so tired," usually the response is, "Yes, I'm so tired too." It's a difficult thing to quantify, and I just felt ashamed that I couldn't cope. However,
sorry, Gill, the timelines here are so important, aren't they? So 1988 was when your daughter was born. 1995 is when you received the first letter, the notification. And that is significant because this is beyond the point at which you have any claim of medical negligence. Is that right?
Yes, that's what a lawyer advised us. He said the statute of limitations for medical negligence was 3 years, so it was too late to sue. There was a group action brought under legislation for product liability, and that is still ongoing, 26 years later.
What is it you hope for today?
From the Penrose Inquiry, I think it's about something more important than compensation, although I understand that a lot of people are in desperate need of help. But the Penrose Inquiry isn't about compensation, it's about accountability, about finding out whether mistakes were made and whether they were acknowledged fast enough. And from the research that I did when I wrote my memoir, which is also published this week, from the research I did in the British Library newspaper archive in London, it seems clear to me, from a quarter of a century of headlines, that Britain lagged behind other countries in dealing with this problem, and lagged significantly behind by
So, Gill,
over a decade.
is it your thought that that information was deliberately withheld from you, that there was deliberate practice involved?
Well, there's been a lot of allegations of cover-up. It's a very complicated story, and it will be I think that's what public inquiries are for. It will be very interesting to hear what Lord Penrose says about that. But there has certainly been a failure to acknowledge mistakes fast enough, and what I hope for from the Penrose Inquiry is that in future, because I think it's too late now to really fix the last 30 years for the thousands of people who have been made ill or who have died, but what the Penrose Inquiry can do is, for the future, can change our culture so that it's possible for mistakes to be acknowledged fast and for everyone to be understanding that mistakes will happen, but if they're acknowledged quickly, their effect is so much less devastating.
Gill, really appreciate your time this morning. It's Gill Fyffe speaking to us this morning from Edinburgh.